Federalist 78, Part 2. I forgot to mention something in Part 1. Let me say something that's very important when you're reading these papers, especially the ones on the Judicial Branch, starting with Federalist 78. All the Federalist Papers are focusing on the Constitution before the Bill of Rights was written, or became part of the Constitution, before the first 10 amendments became part of the Constitution. So constantly remember that. And also, when you look at the Bill of Rights, 5 of the 10 first amendments, 5 of the 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights have to do with judiciary, with the things Hamilton is going to be talking about in these 5 papers. So there are obviously things that they had not addressed in the original, in the body of the Constitution coming out of the Philadelphia Convention. And then these anti-federalists that kept on saying we want a Bill of Rights, Bill of Rights. So we have to really thank them, even though I've been constantly talking about the Federalist Papers and not mentioning so much any of the anti-federalists. We really have to thank them because they, by criticizing the shortcomings of the Constitution that came out of Philadelphia Convention, they are the ones that forced these founders to seriously consider adding the Bill of Rights to the body of the Constitution. Because the Constitution is wonderful, but without the Bill of Rights, it really doesn't mean that much when you look at the whole scheme of things. All right, I will be reading starting paragraph 4 of Federalist 78. He says, first, as to the mode of appointing the judges, this is the same with that of appointing the officers of the Union in general, and has been so fully discussed in the 2 last numbers that nothing can be said here which would not be useless repetition. Just like appointing ambassadors and other national officers of the executive branch, and also judges, because he says in the last 2 papers we talked about the fact that we need to have the Senate involved. So the president nominates a person to become a Supreme Court justice, and the Senate has to concur or approve. So he says we've already talked about this. And this is kind of a little break that the American system, this is where American system went its own way or did something unique compared to the British system. So keep that in mind. Second, as to the tenure by which the judges are to hold their places, this chiefly concerns their duration in office, the provision for their support, and the precautions for their responsibility. According to the plan of the Convention, all the judges who may be appointed by the United States are to hold their offices during good behavior, which is conformable to the most approved of the state constitutions, and among the rest to that of this state. Its propriety having been drawn into question by the adversaries of the plan is no light symptom of the rage for objection which disorders their imagination and judgment. The standard of good behavior for the continuance in office of the judicial magistracy is certainly one of the most valuable of modern improvements in the practice of government. He says this is one of the best things that we have come up with, or is it? If any constitution has this provision, it's a wonderful thing. that the judges, federal judges, will be appointed for life during good behavior. In a monarchy, it is an excellent barrier to the despotism of the prince. In a republic, it is a no less excellent barrier to the encroachments and oppressions of the representative body. And it is the best expedient which can be devised in any government to secure a steady, upright, and impartial administration of the laws. So he says it's a wonderful thing because it will keep the legislature in its place. It won't let the legislature encroach upon the rights of the people, and it'll do the same with the executive branch. Whoever attentively considers the different departments of power must perceive that in a government in which they are separated from each other, the judiciary, from the nature of its functions, will always be the least dangerous to the political rights of the Constitution. This sentence is very famous. They say the judiciary, the judicial branch being the least dangerous branch, because it will be least in a capacity to annoy or injure them. The executive not only dispenses the honors, but holds the sword of the community. The legislature not only commands the purse, because all the funding comes from the laws that the legislature passes, but prescribes the rules by which the duties and rights of every citizen are to be regulated. So they write the laws also that everybody's got to follow. The judiciary, on the contrary, has no influence over either the sword or the purse, no direction either of the strength or of the wealth of the society, and can take no action, active resolution, whatever. It may truly be said to have neither force nor will, but merely judgment, and must ultimately depend upon the aid of the executive arm, even for the efficacy of its judgments. So he says, look, judicial branch, the judiciary is going to be the weakest part of these three branches, and it's because it is there to make sure that laws are not violated, your liberty is not taken for granted, that Congress, whether it's the Senate or the House of Representatives or the President, does not overstep its bounds. So we need to have a judiciary that's independent, and one of the best way to make it independent is for these federal judges to be able to serve for life or during good behavior, so that they cannot be fired or their salary will not be decreased by the legislative branch, and the same thing with the executive branch. So he says that's one of the best things we've done. Because if you want them to be the slaves of the legislative branch, then you would make their salaries alterable, or their terms of service, the number of years that they sit as a judge, depending on the pleasure of the legislature or the president. He says then you will just have a dependent judiciary, and that would be awful. The next paragraph says, whoever attentively considers the different, I read that already. The next paragraph, the simple view of the matter suggests several important consequences. It proves incontestably that the judiciary is beyond comparison the weakest of the three departments of power. He even writes a footnote here. The celebrated Montesquieu, speaking of them, says, of the three powers above mentioned, the judiciary is next to nothing in the spirit of the laws. In the spirit of laws. Then I'll continue in the paragraph that it can never attack with success either of the other two branches, and that all possible care is requisite to enable it to defend itself against their attacks. It equally proves that though individual oppressions may now and then proceed from the courts of justice, the general liberty of the people can never be endangered from that quarter. The judges might make a mistake every once in a while, but when you look at the whole scope of things, they would be the best guarantor of your freedoms. I mean, so long as the judiciary remains truly distinct from both the legislative and executive. For I agree that there is no liberty if the power of judging be not separated from the legislative and executive powers. And it proves in the last place that as liberty can have nothing to fear from the judiciary alone, but would have everything to fear from its union with either of the other departments. So that's why another reason we've kept the judicial branch independent, because if you mix its authority with other branches, then you've actually taken its independence away. That as all the effects of such an union must ensue from a dependence of the former on the latter, notwithstanding a nominal and apparent separation, that as from the natural feebleness of the judiciary, it is continual jeopardy of being overpowered, awed, or influenced by its coordinate branches, and that as nothing can contribute so much to its firmness and independence as permanency in office, this quality may therefore be justly regarded as an indispensable ingredient in its constitution, and in a great measure as the citadel of the public justice and public security. So it's a place where it's like a fortress. We can keep your freedoms safe, your liberty safe from the attacks and encroachments by the other two branches.